All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott coming at you with JavaScript courtesy of Murox JavaScript 2nd edition. We're in the middle of Chapter 15 of 17, and Chapter 15 we are up to the section on how to customize properties. When you assign a property or a method to an object, that property is writable, configurable, and enumerable by default. All right, but prior to ECMA script 5, there was no way that you could change this. Now, you can enumerate the properties of an object using a for-in loop or the object keys method. The enumerations produce different results depending on whether the properties used are direct or inherited. Direct properties are also known as an object's own properties. So we see here three of the attributes of an object property. The first is writable, all right, and that's the property's value, if it's set, can be assigned or changed. Second is configurable, and where the property can be deleted or its type can be changed. And the last one is enumerable, where the property will appear in a for-in loop or the Object.keys method. Now, we learned in the last chapter that writing closures is an effective way to give an object private state. But we also learned that in order to be able to have those properties be accessible between files, it's you need to make them public. Otherwise, the second file won't have access to the first file's private state. This can cause problems, though. I mean, for example, if the outside code sets the value of the speed property to null and then deletes it or whatever, when we looked at that earlier. So this table that you see right here, that's also on page 499 in the book, shows three attributes of a property. All three of these return Boolean values indicating whether or not the property meets certain criteria. If you do want to enumerate an object's properties, you can use either, again, a for-in loop or the keys method of the object. And let's look at examples of all those. So here's two ways to enumerate an object's property. You can use the for-in loop, or you can use the Object.keys method. All right. And let's talk for a second about direct versus inherited properties, and it may be the next slide here, and it is. So as you can see, direct properties are those that are assigned to the object directly, hence the name. Inherited properties are those that are assigned in the object's prototype chain, so it may be, assigned to a parent or whatever and cascade down. A for-in loop returns inherited properties. The Object.keys method does not. Remember, there's the for-in and there's the Object.keys method. Now, a couple of things that are in here. You can use the define property method of the object to create or modify a property or customize the property's attributes. And if we look in here, here are the parameters of the Object.defineProperty method. We've got object, which is the object on which the property is created or modified. We have property, which is a string containing the name of the property to be created or modified. And we have descriptor. And descriptor is an object that specifies the attribute values for a property. It either sets the attributes of either a data property or an accessor property. And what's the difference between those? We're going to get to that in just a second. A data property is a property that is the location of where the data is read from and written to. It can be a primitive type or an object type. An accessor is a property that contains getter and setter functions to read and to write data. The attributes of the two descriptor types are shown here. They are configurable, All right, and that shows whether the property can be deleted or have its type changed. The default is false. Enumerable, it's whether the property will be enumerated in a for-in loop or by the Object.keys method. The default is false. Value, and these are they available just in data or just in accessor or in both? That's what that data in both and accessor mean there. Value, which is the value of a property, the default is undefined. Writable, which shows whether or not the property's value can be assigned or changed with a default of false. Get, the function that allows the property's value to be read, the default value is undefined. And set, the value that allows the property's value to be written, and again, the default is undefined. So you can use the define property method of the object to create or modify a data property or an access property. A property added to an object by assigning it is a data property. It's automatically writable, configurable, and enumerable by default. A data property created by the define property method is non-writable, non-configurable, and non-enumerable by default unless you specifically set one or more of those values to true. An accessor property that's created by the define property method is non-configurable and non-enumerable, again, unless you set the values directly to be true. It can be read-only if you include a getter function but no setter, or write-only if you include a setter function but no getter. When you modify an existing property, only the specific attributes are changed. So they show in here, and again, this is really heavy stuff, how you can use this stuff. The define property method gives you control over the property you're defining. If you use strict mode, you'll get a type error if you try to write to a non-writable property or delete a non-configurable property. If you're in non-strict mode, the attempt is ignored, but no error is shown. For the Object.define, the define properties method of the object lets you create or modify several properties at once. The create method of the object lets you create one or more properties at the time you create the object. Here's the syntax of the define properties method, and the parameters are object, which is the object on which the properties will be created or modified, and properties, which are an object that contains one or more descriptor properties. Here's the syntax of the create method of the object, and the parameters that are shown here are prototype, which is the object that will be the prototype for the created object, and properties, which is an object containing one or more of the descriptor objects. A couple more things. The object also provides several methods for checking the attributes of a property, also known as inspecting them. The ones that are shown here, the first one, get own property names, returns an array of all properties created directly on the specified object, whether enumerable or not. Does not include properties in the prototype chain. The second one, get own property descriptor, returns an object containing the values for the specified property's attributes if the property is created directly on the specified object. The third, get prototype of, returns the prototype object of the specified object. The fourth, keys, returns an array of all enumerable properties created directly on the specified object. It does not include properties in the prototype chain. The next one, prototype.hasOwnProperty, returns a Boolean value indicating whether the instance of an object has the specified property created directly on it or not. And the last one, prototype.property is enumerable, returns a Boolean value indicating whether the specified property is enumerable or not. And the chapter ends, the last 3 or 4 pages, by showing an enhanced slideshow application. In this version, the speed variable is once again private. The version that's here uses the module pattern and the Object.create method to create a single slideshow object. All right, and it allows the speed to be changed. The getter function simply returns the value of the speed variable. The setter uses a default value to update the speed variable. Because the speed variable is accessible only through the slideshow speed accessor property, it can't be directly changed by outside code. What this does then is it protects the internal functioning of the object while still allowing some access to the speed variable. So in the example here, what happens is the new change speed method just passes the new speed to the slideshow object's slideshow speed accessor property. But as before, the main JavaScript file sets up and starts the slideshow and hooks up the event handler for the associated buttons. So in my opinion, this was probably the hardest chapter in the book. But ideally, you at least have a fundamental understanding of what namespaces, modules, and custom variables are, and a little bit on how to use them in an application. When we come back, we will be going over Chapter 16, which is how to work with something that's called JavaScript Object Notation, or JSON. We'll be back with that shortly.